Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Liam had spent months warning Earth leaders that the war was unwinnable, that the Zakari Dominion was not just another invading force, but a relentless machine of conquest that had torn through entire star systems without pause. He had sat in high-rise conference rooms dressed in pressed suits, armed with reports, projections, and hard facts, his voice echoing through the chambers of political leaders too comfortable in their illusions of superiority. They had laughed at him, dismissed him, told him Earth was different, that humanity had defied the odds before and would do so again. But now, as he knelt in the ruins of a shattered city, ash falling from the sky like sickly gray snow, he could see just how wrong they had been. The streets were littered with the wreckage of resistance, human soldiers dragged from smoldering bunkers, their weapons little more than useless scraps against the might of the enemy towering above them. Framed by the wreckage of fallen buildings was her, Zizara, the war lady of the Dominion, the crimson-skinned juggernaut who had led the Zakari invasion with ruthless efficiency. 13 feet of raw power draped in the ornate silks of her station, her golden eyes scanning the captured survivors with the detached curiosity of a predator surveying its prey. The Zakari forces stood at her back, a disciplined legion of warriors with their spears humming faintly with residual energy from battle, their armor gleaming even under the thick haze of smoke that still clung to the ruins. There was no wild celebration, no gloating over their victory, only the disciplined silence of soldiers who had conquered so many worlds that it had become routine. Liam clenched his fists, his heart hammering in his chest as Zizara moved through the rows of kneeling prisoners. She barely seemed to register the fear around her, her expression unreadable, her steps measured. When she reached the first line of captives, she tilted her head slightly, assessing them like one might examine livestock. A flick of her fingers, a casual nod, and her officers began separating people into groups. Some led toward transport ships, others dragged to the side, their fate uncertain but all too easy to guess. He tried not to breathe too hard, tried to make himself small and visible, just another nameless prisoner in the wreckage. But fate, or perhaps his own past defiance, had other plans. Her eyes landed on him, and something in her expression shifted. It wasn't recognition exactly, but interest, as though she were piecing something together. Then she smiled, slow and knowing, like a predator that had finally found something worth playing with. "Ah," she murmured, her voice smooth but edged with something that sent a chill down his spine. "You." The way she said it made his stomach twist. Before he could react, she reached down, her massive hand closing around the front of his tattered shirt, lifting him effortlessly off the ground as if he weighed nothing. He gasped, his hands instinctively gripping her wrist, though he knew he had no chance of breaking her hold. Up close, she was even more overwhelming, muscular, battle-scarred, her scent laced with something metallic like the remnants of war itself. Her golden eyes gleamed with something between amusement and possession. "You were the little diplomat, weren't you?" She mused, tilting her head slightly as if recalling a distant memory. "The one who spoke so boldly against me even as your people crumbled." Liam gritted his teeth, refusing to let his fear show. "And you ignored every word I said." Her lips curved into something dangerously close to amusement. "You had fire, little one. I like that." Around them, the Zakari soldiers shifted slightly, waiting for her command. She could snap his neck right here, toss him aside like the countless others who had dared to resist, and yet she didn't. Instead, she seemed to consider him for a moment longer before exhaling through her nose, the sound almost disappointed. "Ashamed to waste you," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Then her decision was made. Without another word, she threw him over her shoulder like a sack of grain. Liam let out a strangled sound of protest, his fist slamming against her back, but it was like punching solid rock. "What the hell are you doing?" She barely spared him a glance as she strode toward her personal warship, the looming vessel that had cast its shadow over the battlefield since the fighting had ended. "Taking you," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He struggled, kicking his legs, trying to twist free, but it was pathetic against her strength. The Zakari soldiers barely even reacted, as if their war lady parading off with a human slung over her shoulder was just another normal part of the day. "Put me down, you overgrown." She smacked his thigh with the back of her hand, a warning tap that sent a dull ache up his leg. "Hush now, little human. You'll make a fool of yourself." Liam seethed, biting down on every curse he wanted to throw at her. The moment she set him down, he would, Well, he had no idea what he would do, but he sure as hell wasn't going to just sit back and let this happen. The warship's interior swallowed them whole, and the moment the door sealed behind them, the sounds of the ruined city, the cries of the other prisoners, faded into eerie silence. The hallways were opulent but cold, a blend of war trophies and luxury. Deep crimson banners hanging from the ceiling, the air thick with the scent of polished metal, and something faintly spiced, like a lingering trace of Zizara's own presence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached what had to be her personal chambers. A massive room lined with intricate carvings, plush seating that looked too fine for a warlord, and a throne-like chair positioned at the center of it all. With no warning, she dumped him onto the floor like he was a pet she'd grown bored of carrying. He hit the ground hard, but he forced himself upright almost immediately, glaring up at her with defiance. "What the hell do you want from me?" She crouched before him, one elbow resting lazily on her knee, her golden gaze burning into him. "I want to see what you do." He frowned. "What?" Her fingers tapped against her knee, slow, calculating. "You humans are so quick to break. I want to see how long you last." His stomach tightened. Whatever game she was playing, he was in it now, and he had no idea what the rules were. Liam's body still ached from being thrown onto the hard floor, but he refused to give Zizara the satisfaction of seeing him struggle. He forced himself to his feet, ignoring the stiffness in his limbs as he took in his surroundings. The chamber was large, bigger than any room he had ever been in, with high vaulted ceilings and walls adorned with intricate carvings that depicted scenes of battle and conquest. Luxurious seating lined the space, and despite the harsh metallic structure of the ship, there were details of opulence everywhere. Deep crimson drapes hanging like banners, a table set with exotic fruits he didn't recognize, and a throne-like chair that Zizara had clearly claimed as her own. Everything about the room screamed authority, power, dominance. It wasn't a warlord's planning room, it was a conqueror's den, a place where someone like her kept trophies. His stomach twisted at the thought. She remained crouched before him, her golden eyes watching his every movement, her expression unreadable. He had seen plenty of war generals before, men and women who had climbed their way to power through diplomacy or brute strength. But there was something different about her. It wasn't just the sheer physical presence she carried. The way her powerful frame and crimson skin made her look like a living god of war. It was the way she studied him, like she wasn't just amused by his defiance but curious. "You're staring," she murmured, breaking the silence, her voice rich with amusement. Liam exhaled sharply, straightening his back. "I'm trying to figure out if I'm a prisoner or a pet." Her lips twitched at that. "That depends," she mused, rising to her full height, the motion fluid and effortless. She loomed over him, her towering form casting a shadow across the chamber, making him feel small in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. "I could have left you with the rest of your people, let the officers decide your fate. Instead, I brought you here." Why? He hated that he had to ask, but there was no other way to get answers. She tilted her head slightly, considering. "Because I wanted to," she said simply. "You stood against me with words when others tried with weapons. You had no power, no army, and yet you fought as if you did. That kind of foolishness is entertaining." Liam clenched his jaw. "So I'm just here for your amusement? Would you rather be dead?" He said nothing. Her smirk deepened as she took a slow step toward him. "You humans are so fragile when faced with power, yet you pretend otherwise. I want to see how long you last before you break." His spine stiffened. "I don't break." Zizara let out a low chuckle, stepping past him, her presence brushing too close as she moved toward a small embedded panel on the wall. The door to the chamber slid open, and for a moment, Liam considered bolting. But where would he even go? He was on an enemy warship, surrounded by soldiers who would kill him on sight if they didn't have orders otherwise. The second he took off running, he would be proving her right. Instead, he squared his shoulders. "So what now? Are you expecting me to bow? Call you war lady? Act like one of your soldiers?" She turned back, crossing her arms over her chest. "I expect you to be interesting," she replied. "If you bore me, I might reconsider whether you deserve to be here at all." Liam gritted his teeth. She was playing a game, one where he was the piece, and she was the one moving the board. If he let himself react to every taunt, every little push, she would have complete control. He needed to figure out what she actually wanted, because this wasn't just about breaking a prisoner. There was something else beneath it all, something she wasn't saying. But he had time, and if she was keeping him here, then that meant he had an advantage. He was alive. Zizara's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned toward the open doorway. "Come," she ordered, not even looking back to see if he would follow. "It's time you saw the rest of your new home." Liam didn't move immediately. He hated the way she made it sound like he belonged here. This wasn't his home. This was a prison, no matter how gilded the cage. But standing still wouldn't help him, and if he refused, she might just drag him along again. So he swallowed his pride and stepped after her, matching her pace without trailing behind like a lost dog. The hallways were just as massive as her chambers, the ceiling stretching high above, the architecture a mix of brutalist war design and unnerving elegance. He had expected the ship to be cold, sterile, but it wasn't. There was a strange warmth to the walls, a hum of life pooling beneath the structure, as if the ship itself was alive. Soldiers passed them in formation, all towering, all clad in the deep onyx and crimson armor of the Dominion. Most of them barely spared him a glance. Those who did gave him looks of confusion or contempt. He wasn't just a captive, he was an anomaly. Zizara led him through winding corridors until they reached an open expanse of polished black flooring, the space vast, a command center stretching out into a sweeping view of the stars beyond the reinforced glass. "This is the heart of the fleet," she said, motioning toward the cluster of officers working at control panels, their holographic displays shifting with incoming battle reports. "You wanted to understand the Dominion. Now you have a front row seat." Liam kept his face neutral. "And what exactly am I supposed to do here?" "You'll observe," she said. "See how we operate, perhaps even learn something. And if I don't want to?" Zizara finally turned fully to face him. "Then I'll find another use for you." The weight of her words hung between them. He could challenge her, push back, but that wouldn't change his situation. He was stuck here whether he liked it or not. But that didn't mean he had to play by her rules, so he smirked. "Fine. Let's see what makes your empire so unstoppable." Her golden eyes flashed with something unreadable, but she didn't argue. Instead, she simply watched him, and for the first time, Liam had the unsettling feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was testing him as much as he was testing her. Liam sat stiffly in the corner of the command center, arms crossed, eyes scanning the massive holographic displays that surrounded the room. He had no real choice but to follow Zizara when she led him here. And now, watching the cold efficiency with which the Zakari officers managed their operations, he felt the weight of his own helplessness settle like a stone in his gut. Every console flickered with reports from conquered worlds, intercepted transmissions from what little remained of Earth's forces, and logistical updates detailing how the Dominion would digest his planet piece by piece. The realization made his stomach churn. Earth wasn't just defeated, it was being processed. Zizara stood at the center of it all, watching her officers work with a silent authority that made Liam grind his teeth. There was no shouting, no chaos, no disorder, just the relentless machine of an empire moving forward, adjusting, expanding, crushing obstacles beneath its heel. Even after witnessing the battlefield firsthand, he hadn't fully grasped just how vast her power was. Seeing it now, displayed so clinically, so precisely, sent an uneasy shiver down his spine. She turned her head slightly, as if sensing his thoughts. "You're quiet, diplomat," she murmured without looking at him. Liam exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I have nothing to say to tyrants." Zizara let out a low chuckle, finally turning to face him. "Tyrant? Is that what you think I am?" She gestured to the officers, the displays, the steady rhythm of her war machine moving in perfect synchronization. "Look at them. Do they seem like mindless soldiers trembling under my rule?" He narrowed his eyes. "They follow orders without question." "As do yours," she countered smoothly. "Your generals, your politicians, they demand obedience just as I do. The only difference is that I win." Liam clenched his jaw, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. He knew engaging in this argument was pointless. Zizara didn't see herself as a tyrant. To her, she was a ruler, a conqueror, a force of nature that shaped the galaxy according to her will. It was impossible to reason with someone who had never known defeat. She studied him for a long moment, golden eyes gleaming with something between curiosity and amusement. "You're not as afraid as you should be," she mused. "Most humans in your position would be begging by now." "I don't beg," Liam said, keeping his voice steady, "especially not to someone who thinks kidnapping me is a form of entertainment." Zizara smirked, stepping closer. "You misunderstand, little human. I didn't take you for entertainment." She leaned in slightly, her presence pressing down on him like a physical weight. "I took you because you interest me." Liam felt his breath hitch involuntarily, but he masked it quickly, glaring up at her. And what does that mean exactly? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, watching him like he was some sort of puzzle she was piecing together. Then, without another word, she turned sharply and gestured for him to follow. Walk with me. He hesitated. Where? She didn't stop. You'll see. For a moment, he considered staying put just to spite her, but what would that accomplish? If he wanted to understand what she was planning, if he wanted even the smallest chance of escape, he needed to see more, learn more, get inside her head just as much as she was trying to get inside his. So, with a reluctant sigh, he pushed himself to his feet and followed. The halls of the warship were just as imposing as before, tall, metallic, and humming with the soft pulse of energy running through its veins. Zakari soldiers passed them in formation, their expressions impassive, but Liam could feel their gazes lingering just a fraction too long. They weren't used to seeing someone like him walking beside their war lady. A human, a conquered diplomat, an outsider. Zizara didn't seem to care. She strolled through the corridors with the effortless grace of someone who had never had to question their authority, her silk garments shifting against the heavy muscle of her frame. She was built like a weapon, elegant, refined, but utterly deadly beneath the surface. Eventually, they entered a new chamber, a vast training hall lined with sparring arenas where Zakari warriors clashed in brutal displays of combat. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, fists colliding, bodies hitting the floor, the low hum of energy weapons activating and deactivating. It was a relentless display of power, and Liam immediately knew why she had brought him here. You wanted to understand my people, Zizara said, gesturing toward the warriors. This is how we are raised. Strength is not given to us. We take it. We earn it. Liam crossed his arms. So what? You expect me to be impressed? She smirked. No, I expect you to learn. Before he could react, she snapped her fingers. A soldier stepped forward, a towering Zakari male with obsidian skin and a scar slashing across his jaw. He was easily 9 feet tall, his broad frame built for war. He carried himself with a lethal confidence, his sharp golden eyes flicking toward Liam with clear disdain. Jorth, Zizara said smoothly, a human diplomat thinks he understands strength. Show him what true power looks like. Liam barely had time to react before Jorth moved, a blur of motion, a massive hand wrapping around his collar, yanking him off his feet. Liam's breath caught in his throat as he was hurled backward, his body slamming into the floor with a force that rattled his bones. Pain shot through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth, shoving himself up onto his elbows. Zizara watched, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Jorth didn't wait. He lunged again, his sheer size and speed overwhelming, and Liam barely managed to roll out of the way before a fist the size of his head crashed down where he had been lying. He knew he was completely outmatched. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a fighter, and the Zakari warrior towering over him could break him in half with a single strike. But he refused to just take the beating. Instead of trying to fight head-on, he did the only thing he could. He moved. Ducking low, he let Jorth's next strike graze past him, using the larger alien's own momentum against him. He wasn't strong, but he was fast, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of surprise in Jorth's expression as he stumbled slightly, thrown off by the unexpected dodge. A chuckle echoed from the sidelines. Liam turned just in time to see Zizara grinning, golden eyes gleaming with something close to genuine amusement. Not bad, little human, she mused. Perhaps you do have some fight in you after all. Jorth growled, clearly irritated, and Liam's stomach tightened as he realized his luck had just run out. This wasn't over, not even close. Liam barely had a moment to breathe before Jorth recovered, his massive frame tensing like a predator preparing to strike again. The Zakari warrior's eyes burned with newfound irritation, his pride clearly wounded from the fact that a mere human had dodged even a single attack. The mistake, Liam realized, wasn't in dodging. It was in making Jorth look bad in front of an audience. Now the warrior wasn't just fighting to teach a lesson. He was fighting to prove a point. Jorth moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in a blink, his arms sweeping outward like a battering ram. Liam tried to move, tried to duck, but there was no avoiding the sheer size and power bearing down on him. The force of the hit sent him sprawling across the floor, his ribs screaming in protest as he skidded against the polished surface. Stars burst in his vision, and for a second, he struggled just to remember how to breathe. The impact rattled his bones, pain surging through his limbs as he coughed, forcing himself onto his hands and knees. Laughter rippled through the gathered Zakari warriors, low and rumbling, a pack of wolves amused by the sight of prey struggling to stand. But one laugh cut through the others, sharp and distinct, Zizara's. Liam blinked through the haze of pain, shifting his gaze toward her. She wasn't laughing cruelly like the others, wasn't sneering in amusement at his suffering. No, her expression was different, assessing, intrigued, as if she were watching something more interesting than she had expected. She leaned back against a nearby support beam, arms crossed, golden eyes gleaming with the same kind of anticipation one might have while watching a particularly entertaining duel. Again, she commanded, her voice carrying across the training hall like a blade slicing through air. Jorth didn't hesitate. The warrior advanced once more, his steps deliberate, calculated. He was taking his time now, savoring the inevitable outcome like a cat playing with a cornered mouse. Liam forced himself upright, his chest heaving, mind racing. He was outmatched in every possible way. Strength, speed, endurance. But he had one advantage. Jorth thought he had already won. That was his mistake. Liam feigned a stumble, letting his weight shift in a way that made it look as if his legs were failing him. Jorth took the bait, lunging forward with a crushing downward strike, aiming to end this fight with a single humiliating blow. But Liam had been waiting for this exact moment. Instead of trying to resist, he twisted sharply, using his smaller size to slip beneath Jorth's outstretched arm. His foot caught the inside of the warrior's knee, shifting his balance just enough to send him off course. Jorth's momentum carried him forward too fast, too committed, his heavy frame overextended, and before he could fully recover, Liam drove an elbow into his side, aiming for where the armor plating was weakest. It wasn't enough to do real damage, but it was enough to send the Zakari warrior staggering a single step. And that single step changed everything. Silence fell over the training hall. The warriors who had been laughing just moments ago weren't laughing anymore. Zizara tilted her head, her smirk widening just slightly, her golden gaze locked onto Liam with something that looked disturbingly like approval. Jorth's expression darkened, his pride clearly seething beneath the surface. He let out a low growl, his body tensing, but Zizara lifted a hand. "Enough," she commanded. The warrior immediately froze, though his glare toward Liam remained venomous, his fists clenched at his sides. But he did not move to attack again. The unspoken authority in Zizara's voice was absolute, and no one, not even a towering brute like Jorth, would dare to disobey it. Liam, still catching his breath, wiped a hand across his mouth, tasting the faint metallic tang of blood from where his lip had split. His body ached, his ribs protested with every inhale. But despite all of it, he stood tall. He refused to let himself sag, refused to look weak even as exhaustion clawed at his muscles. Zizara's gaze swept over him once more before she finally turned toward Jorth. "Leave us," she ordered. The warrior hesitated for only a moment before giving a stiff nod, shooting one final glare at Liam before stomping off. The other Zakari soldiers gradually followed, some murmuring amongst themselves, others casting lingering glances at their war lady and the human who had just defied one of their own. Once they were alone, Zizara strode toward him, each step slow, deliberate, until she was close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her towering frame. "You surprise me, little human," she murmured, tilting her head slightly. "You're weaker than us, slower, more fragile, and yet—" She reached out, her fingers brushing over his bruised jaw, her touch surprisingly light. "You do not fall as easily as I expected." Liam swallowed hard, but he held her gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. "I told you," he said, voice low but steady. "I don't break." Her smirk deepened. "No, you don't." For a moment, she just watched him, her golden eyes gleaming with something unreadable. Then, as if making a decision, she pulled back and turned sharply toward the exit. "Come," she ordered over her shoulder. "You need to be patched up before I break you for real." Liam let out a slow breath, exhaling the tension in his chest. He didn't argue, didn't resist, because this wasn't the end. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was something else now, something that Zizara found worth keeping. Liam followed Zizara through the dim corridors of the warship, every step sending dull pulses of pain through his body. His ribs ached from Jorth's attack. His lips still throbbed from the earlier impact, and he could feel the faint sting of bruises forming along his arms. But despite the discomfort, he forced himself to walk upright, to match the war lady's pace. Even though she towered over him, he refused to appear weak. Not now, not after what had just happened. The moment he had sent Jorth stumbling, the air in the training hall had changed. The laughter had stopped. The warriors had looked at him differently. She had looked at him differently. He wasn't a helpless prisoner anymore. He was something else. He just didn't know what yet. The warship's interior pulsed with a quiet hum, the deep throb of its engines vibrating faintly beneath his feet as they walked. He could feel the eyes of passing Zakari warriors lingering on him, some filled with curiosity, others with barely hidden disdain. To them, he was an anomaly, a human who wasn't cowering, who had faced one of their own and hadn't been crushed beneath their strength. That alone was enough to make him dangerous in their eyes. Zizara said nothing as she led him into a different section of the ship, one that felt more private, less militarized. The walls here were lined with deep crimson banners, the metallic sheen of the flooring softened by intricate engravings, as if someone had taken the time to add a personal touch to the otherwise cold structure. The air smelled different too, less like metal and war, more like something spiced and warm, a faint trace of something uniquely hers. She stopped in front of a large reinforced door, placing her palm against a glowing panel. A soft beep echoed, and the door slid open with a smooth hiss, revealing a lavish chamber beyond. Liam barely had time to take it in before she gestured him inside. "Sit," she ordered. He hesitated, glancing around. The room was nothing like the sterile military halls of the rest of the ship. It was personal, plush seating, a massive war table with holographic displays dimmed to a soft glow, a towering window overlooking the vast expanse of space. The farthest corner held what could only be described as a bed, if beds were built for giants. Dark silk sheets cascaded down the sides, the structure itself reinforced with sleek, curved metal, looking both intimidating and strangely inviting at the same time. Liam exhaled slowly before stepping forward and lowering himself onto one of the cushioned seats, wincing slightly as his ribs protested the motion. Zizara crossed the room effortlessly, grabbing a small metallic case from a shelf and striding toward him. She knelt in front of him, opening the case with a flick of her fingers. Inside were sleek medical instruments, vitals of unknown liquids, and a roll of silvery material that pulsed faintly with energy. He frowned. "You're the one fixing me up." She smirked as she pulled out one of the vials. "You'd rather one of my warriors do it?" "Depends. Do they also enjoy throwing people into walls for fun?" Zizara let out a low chuckle, shaking her head. "Jorth is a brute, but he serves his purpose. You embarrassed him today." She pulled the cap off the vial, tilting it slightly. The liquid inside shifted colors, glowing faintly as she poured a few drops onto a small cloth. "He won't forget that." Liam sighed, leaning his head back slightly as she reached for his face. "Great. That's exactly what I wanted, to make a lifelong enemy on a warship filled with people who already don't like me." She pressed the cloth to his split lip without warning. The sharp sting made him hiss through his teeth, his hands twitching at his sides, but he refused to flinch away. Her touch was deliberate, firm but not cruel, her fingers brushing against his skin as she worked with an efficiency that spoke of experience. She had done this before, many times. Not for humans, maybe, but for her own soldiers, for herself. "You don't need them to like you," she murmured, dabbing the cloth along the cut before reaching for the silvery material in the case. "You just need them to respect you." Liam scoffed. "And you think I earned that today?" "You survived," she said simply, tearing a strip of the silvery material and pressing it against the bruise forming along his jaw. The second it touched his skin, a strange warmth spread through the area, dulling the pain almost instantly. That is more than most would expect from a human. He studied her, watching the way her golden eyes stayed focused on her task, her expression unreadable. She was always watching, always calculating. He could feel it, like she was waiting for something, testing him in ways he didn't fully understand yet. He exhaled slowly. "You still haven't told me what I am to you." Her fingers paused against his jaw for a fraction of a second before she pulled back, placing the last of the medical tools back into the case. She snapped it shut and leaned back on her heels, studying him with an expression that sent an odd chill down his spine. "You are mine," she said simply. Liam's breath caught, his stomach twisting at the sheer certainty in her voice. "You think you own me?" he asked, keeping his tone even despite the tightness in his chest. She smirked. "I take what I want, Liam, and I've taken you." She rose to her full height, her towering frame casting a long shadow over him. "The only question left is whether you will fight against it or embrace it." His pulse pounded in his ears, a mixture of defiance and something far more unsettling stirring in his gut. He had played political games before, had dealt with power-hungry leaders, manipulative diplomats, and tyrants who masked their cruelty with flowery words. But this was different. Zizara wasn't pretending. She wasn't weaving illusions of diplomacy or control. She was raw, undeniably honest in her intentions. She wanted him, and for the first time since being taken aboard this ship, he wasn't sure if that terrified him or intrigued him. Liam sat still, his mind racing as Zizara's words settled deep into his bones. "You are mine." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of absolute certainty, spoken as though the matter had already been settled, as though she had made a claim and that was all there was to it. His entire life had been spent negotiating, maneuvering through political landscapes where power was hidden behind words, traded in hushed meetings and backroom deals. But Zizara didn't operate in whispers. She took what she wanted, and there was no room for argument, no hesitation. And yet he wasn't a passive piece in her game. He had survived today, had stood in the heart of her ship, faced her warriors, and walked away still breathing. That meant something, even if he didn't fully understand what. He met her gaze, refusing to look away, forcing himself to hold steady even as something deep in his gut twisted in response to the intensity in her golden eyes. "You think this is settled," he said, his voice calm but firm, testing her reaction. "You think just because you took me off the battlefield, just because you keep me in this cage with silk curtains, that I belong to you?"